Marcus Philly, welcome to the show.
I appreciate it. You've got yourself quite a scenery behind you. I'm like going to have to stay focused despite all the great distractions that are back there.
Yeah, so funny enough, this literally just got put up, like finalized over the course of the last like week and a half. So one of my coaches is really good with woodworking. And I was like, dude, I want this, like, I want to get a backdrop with some bookshelves behind me because my wife was going to murder me if I just kept my books all over the house. So he helped me put this up. We put the LED lights in. And it was, yeah, man, it came out fantastic. I'm really happy with it. Nice.
I'm going to steal some ideas for when I put mine together at my house.
Do it. I'm all about it. Yeah, I love all the colors and whatnot that you got going on. You said, how long have you had the podcast studio for?
Well, we've been doing our podcast for probably 5, maybe 6 years now, but it was just like 2 years ago that we sort of decked out this upstairs at our gym, at our facility with the background. So we decided we wanted to put the podcast on YouTube, and we're like, well, we got to have something that looks, presentable. So we put these together.
Very nice, man. Well, I mean, I usually listen through just Apple Podcasts, but everything that I've seen that you've been putting out on YouTube, it's obvious that, you've been, the business has been growing and you've been trying to, follow along with that and like building out the studio and everything. So the aesthetics look the part.
Yeah, it's certainly been part of I think probably starting with the pandemic and realizing like this is like our way to connect with people. Not that we were connecting with people through media before, but it was like, this is where a lot of people are turning their attention, and we want to have the cleanest, and most presentable studio that we can. So that was like this type of setting, upstairs podcasting, but also the gym and the, the gym layout and the flooring and everything else.
Yeah, and that's really where you started going with the color scheme like that too, right? Like that's really where the blue and the orange started coming in.
Yeah, we did like sort of it was sometime maybe in 2020 we did a rebrand. Like, so formerly, and you've been following long enough where you know that like when I got out of CrossFit, I started a business called Revival Strength. Revival Strength was my personal coaching business, which then became a collective of coaches coaching under the Revival Strength brand, doing individual remote coaching. Then we opened up a brick and mortar gym called Revival Strength. I had a supplement business that was called Revive RX. It all kind of bled together. But over the course of a couple of years, we became very well known. I became very well known as the functional bodybuilding guy, because I was writing training programs, functional bodybuilding training programs. I was marketing it as functional bodybuilding training programs. And it was just clear after 3 years of running the business, there was nobody that ever referenced me as the Revival Strength guy. They were like, oh yeah, Marcus Philly, the functional bodybuilding guy. And so we were like, well, do we, and plus it was creating some brand confusion. They're like, well, what are you, Revival Strength? Are you functional bodybuilding? We also had a training program called Awaken Training Series. So there was just like, what are you? So we're like, we got to just simplify. Everything became functional bodybuilding. So we were like, okay, website change, blah, blah, blah. And with that, we rebranded with some colors, the oranges and the blues and the white tones. And then that was like, let's upgrade the facility, and all of that sort of kind of became our next evolution starting in the pandemic.
Yeah. So that was when you had your personal Instagram account and then started to create the functional bodybuilding side of things as a separate entity, correct?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, Marcus Philly as a personal, social media handle and channel has been around for as long as, I don't know, Facebook's been around, but literally I remember getting that college invitation to join Facebook, when I was it was 2003 or something like that.
Don't date yourself, man.
Yeah. And then functional bodybuilding, actually, what's funny is that 5 years ago, I think we started the functional bodybuilding channel. And we also started a Revival Strength channel. So we had all these different social media handles. Functional bodybuilding as a channel was simply a place to post our movement library. That's all we were doing. It was a YouTube channel where we posted all of our demo videos, or we archived all our demo videos, and the Instagram page was, a new movement every day, twice a day, with an explanation of like what circumstance you would want to use this in. And then when we decided to rebrand, we're like, okay, well, that page and that channel, those channels are going to host more content than just demo videos. And so we started to expand that. We closed the other channels that were connected to Revival Strength and Revive RX, because those businesses ceased to exist. And then, so now we really have Marcus Philly as a brand channel for me and for like what I'm about, how I approach coaching, my philosophy on training, how I approach my own health and fitness. And then functional bodybuilding is really, this is where we house, things about the brand, the methodology, the training programs, how you can contact us for coaching, and really a place for like people who do our training system to feel like they have a home.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we're starting to see this shift where a lot of people are realizing the value of building their personal brand. Like, I feel like this is what the online space has kind of brought to the table. Before it was very much so, don't worry about yourself, pour everything into the business. And I think that between some of the shorter forms of social media like TikTok and Reels and that sort of thing, and then long form like YouTube, like people are starting to see the value in being able to build themselves as an individual, because it just gives authenticity to the brand.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I sort of did it the opposite way, where I was like, I didn't, excuse me, my first business was a CrossFit gym. And so, building a personal brand online didn't really help my local business that much. My target audience wasn't really looking at what I was doing on social media from a competitive athletics perspective in CrossFit. But I built that brand, and that is what gave rise to other business opportunities that I had later on. Those were my first remote customers that I got, remote clients that were saying, "Hey, will you coach me in CrossFit?" And then fast forward a number of years, that was the pool, the customer base that bought my first online training program. So we definitely, that was my business account. My business was my personal brand, which is true for some people out there, but it's slightly different, I suppose, to sort of lump all that together into one. Sure.
Yeah. So I do want to rewind the tape a little bit, because I'm sure that a lot of the listeners are going to know at least something about your backstory, some of them more than others. But I think that it's really relevant to the conversation, because you started out as a med school student, correct?
Yep. I mean, if we start the clock in 2004, that was when I started as a med school student.
Sure. Yeah. I guess like in terms of like getting involved with this whole thing, I think that you always position everything I've heard from you. You've used your experiences as part of going to med school as kind of the beginning stages of like what got you really fascinated into CrossFit and fitness.
Yes. Yeah. It was, I would say that that was definitely the time when I started to explore CrossFit most deeply. I actually learned of CrossFit before I went to medical school, maybe about a year before medical school, after I had just wrapped up my college experience, and I was very into health and fitness and, wanted to basically pursue a career that was an intersection of medicine and health and fitness. And by that, I mean nutrition meets fitness, prescription meets medical supervision, to basically say we can treat anybody. That was my goal, was like, yeah, if you're a trainer, a fitness trainer, a nutrition coach, you really don't have access to treating the sickest people, because those people will show up and they'll need doctor supervision. They'll need a doctor to, sign off on whatever they're doing. And I'm like, I want to have that person in-house so we can just get to work, right? Because even people that are really sick, they need to start moving and eating well. So that was kind of what I went to medical school with, the intention of like pursuing that. CrossFit snuck its way in there as like, oh, this adds a little bit of we could talk about how that added something to my thought process. But, I was ready to go to medical school with that in mind, was in this gap season between college and medicine, was going to go to medical school and matriculate. And then like the year before, somebody was like, come do this workout with me. And it was CrossFit. And so CrossFit started to inform so much of how I viewed the health and fitness world. And yeah, then it kind of, they both sort of evolved for that first year at medical school and really changed the course of where I was headed.
Yeah, this is actually something that you and I oddly have in common. So I was in school for exercise science, and it was the end of my sophomore year, beginning of my junior year, that I was first exposed to CrossFit. And it was like a total like paradigm shift, like mind blown moment for me, because here I am in classes learning about all the traditional side of things as far as like the NSCA, ACSM. And then on the backside of this, I'm going into these CrossFit gyms where I'm watching these average moms overhead squatting 135. And I'm like, this is something special, you know? So it completely changed around my perspective on both my education and what I wanted to do after it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think many similarities there. And I think what would be super interesting for me, and this isn't for this conversation, but be like, okay, hindsight, what really was so special about CrossFit that produced results in people that we might otherwise not see results in, that got us thinking, okay, there's something else going on here? Because personally, I will look back and be like, it wasn't the secret sauce of CrossFit. There was, like, in the methodology per se, there was something else that was very attractive to, you know, call it the soccer mom that you just alluded to, right? It's like that person would have never otherwise gone to the gym to learn how to overhead squat, but they happened to want to show up here, and we applied a certain method that got them doing it. But had they shown up and done a different method, they would have been potentially able to do it too. But it was just like there was something that was so electric and magnetic about that time in CrossFit. And that was what ultimately was like, I need to be a part of that. That is why I mean, you know, I don't know what I would have done with medicine had CrossFit not entered my life, but I think it really took CrossFit and the magnetic pull of the community of CrossFit and what was happening with CrossFit and the people that were showing up to CrossFit, like the demographic, that I was like, well, I got to go get involved in this thing. And then pair that with, you know, sort of a diminished passion for the traditional medical system. It just worked together to be like, I'm going to just press pause on this and go explore that for a year and see what I can make of it. And if it's going in the right direction, I'm not coming back to medical school. But if it's not going in the right direction, like, I got this fallback plan, which is medicine, which is kind of weird to say, but it was like I was already in the system.
Well, and I think we can both appreciate the fact that in the medical world, there's probably more red tape than just about anywhere. And in CrossFit, especially in like 2008, 9, 10 CrossFit, there was no red tape to be found. And you actually were like, everyone that was getting involved then had the opportunity to be a pioneer in the space.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like more than red tape too in medicine, where it's like maybe politics has more red tape than medicine. Who knows? But in medicine,
it's a toss up.
It's a toss up. In medicine, you got to go through 7 to 8 years of training before you're even practicing and dealing with the red tape, so to speak. You know, it's like, so it's a very, you gotta play the patience game. You know, it's a very, which is why it's in many circumstances, it's a well compensated profession, but it also means that, you know, you have to dedicate a lot of years to education. You're helping people along the way, but it's like you don't have autonomy and like really full capacity to like treat people until you're really a resident, or even you've gone through residency and you've learned what you need to learn. Like, you know, it's like somebody who graduates with a medical degree is like, you know, a first year resident is like pretty useless. Like, they don't have a lot of skills. They don't have, I mean, and this is going to rub somebody the wrong way, and I don't mean it that way. Like, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the medical community, people that make it through medicine. They're doing a lot more hands-on training for, people in their first 4 years of the medical training system. But the truth is, like, a first-year resident or an intern, it's like they haven't done anything. They've been in the books, they've been studying book stuff, and now it's like time to go and do some actual doctoring. So it's
for sure. And I mean, no matter what job field we're talking about here, like, it takes time after you finish your schooling to get involved with a company to understand how they want to do things anyway. And that real world application applies to people in the medical field, equally. My wife's a clinical pharmacist, and she started at 28, I believe. It was either 27 or 28. And like, we felt that was long, and like we have friends that started school for medical school around the same time she did. And like, depending on what specialization they went into, some of them are in cardiac and whatnot, and like they could be in for another 3 or 4 years. It's crazy to think that you can start your career at like 33, 34 years old. Yeah.
Yeah. And, there's, I don't want to, like, it's not all bad. There's not all downside to it. Obviously there's major upside. And for certain people, that's a really like attractive path. It's like, I get down this path, the education system suits them well. They really enjoy it. They love it. And they know that if just put in the time and they can live a balanced and fulfilling life during that process, then on the back end, they're going to have a pretty stable career and a lot of job security. And that's fantastic. And then on the flip side, it's like, yeah, you can get right into personal training without much education or experience. And that has its upsides and its downsides. It's like, well, we got a industry full of people that could potentially know nothing and have no experience and, just be out there like trying to do good. But it's like, I want to go do good, but no one's given me a prescription pad to go and prescribe medicine because I don't know anything. I don't have the experience to do it. It's not the same thing as prescribing squats or push-ups, right. But there is there's clearly some risk to doing training, and CrossFit and our early years in CrossFit was a very good example of
very good. I'm sure we'll get into that quite a bit.
You get a lot of people that don't know anything about training or have no limited experience, but they're great community builders, or they're inspired, or they're passionate, or they just hated their other job and they're like, I'm opening up a CrossFit gym. And, there was a mixed bag for sure.
For sure. And I don't mean to pull an Alex Hormozi card, but I think you can also look at the differences from a compounding perspective on starting as a coach in your like early to mid 20s and being able to work with people from that time until waiting until you're in your 30s, so it's like you're giving up 6, 7, 8 years or so of time that you could have spent developing as a coach, working with a clientele base and transforming lives from the very beginning.
That's true. Yeah. And I'll be perfectly honest. Like, well, I didn't know Alex Hormozi back then. I've heard that a lot. I've never really thought back on like my experience and made some of those connections. But certainly like I started getting into the trenches and building a lot of experience that led me down the path that I am today. And yeah, I would have gotten through my medical training at the age of 34, probably, which was only 4 years ago. And at that point I had already, built a couple of successful businesses and had one business failure, a couple business failures, and, done a lot of good and made a lot of mistakes. And that's just like, and accumulated some wealth, right? Like,
sure.
There's, there definitely were some interesting parallels and overlaps to a lot of the messages that he speaks about now, for sure.
For sure. And that's coming from the business side, but just imagine also, the impact that you had on so many lives by the time you reached that age of 34 that you otherwise probably wouldn't have had, at least not to scale.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's true. And I won't also deny the fact that I got to selfishly pursue something that there's no way I would have done in medical school. I mean, I know Julie Fouché was like an example of somebody who was a medical student who won who placed well in the CrossFit Games, but I think she even had to retire from CrossFit in order to like actually get done with her medical training. I got to pursue a whole career after college, after medical school, or after I left medical school, in a sport that is, really special and really demanding. And That was a selfish pursuit that I definitely turned into a, opportunity from a business perspective later on, but that wasn't my goal at the time. There was nothing like people like, hey, I get interviewed. They're like, how's it like to be a professional athlete? I was like, well, I was a professional coach who was doing CrossFit like selfishly on the side. Like as soon as class was over, I was like getting people out the door so I could start my training before the next class 2 hours later. Like I was just filling all my extra time during the day doing CrossFit, like most of the coaches at the time and the gym owners at the time were doing. I just happened to be a little bit better at it and maybe had a better training background and maybe a slight more dedication and more natural, or genetic gifts. And that helped me rise to the top and then start this, like what people called a professional career in CrossFit. But yeah, that was also something that I could never have done had I been, I would have stayed in shape. I would have been fit, a fit medical student. I would have probably found a CrossFit box eventually to join, and I would have done some stuff, but there's no way I was going to qualify for the CrossFit Games. So
do you think the autonomy that came with choosing this path was a big decision maker for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Like I didn't know I wanted. Yeah. It's like I'm putting language to a lot of the things that I felt back in the day, thanks to like this like boom of like YouTube business gurus that are out there and like basically, which is great because it's like I wanted to go to business school, but I didn't, and now I can go to business school like on YouTube. Like, and that's not a shot at like business schools. Like there's a different type of education that you learn there, and there's aspects that I'm not like digging into about an MBA, but like I'm learning a lot through people like Hormozy and or their business and what they put out from a content perspective. And you're right, like was I going to be somebody that wanted to work for myself or work for somebody else, and I never thought about that, but I knew that by being a coach and by pursuing that as my career at the time when I was in my 20s and I didn't have a lot of responsibilities, I was like, I'm getting to do so much of what I want to do. But when I'm going down this medical path, like my life is devoted to something else. Like I'm devoted to a system. I'm devoted to the university. I'm devoted to this, and I'm on their time. I'm on their schedule. And I have to like fit my life into these small little buckets, these small little windows here and there. And that was hard for me, really hard. And it always left me feeling depleted, unfulfilled. And so I wanted to take some of that back. Actually, I didn't know I wanted to take it back, but I just craved it. And then pursuing the path that I was on allowed me to do that. And I was like, I never want to give this up. I got to do everything in my power to like turn my vocation, whatever skill I have, my passion to help people into a lifestyle that allows me to retain this autonomy that you talk about or that you mentioned and still do something good and earn a living and, build the future that I want to build. And that was like what I started out thinking and doing. And that I fulfilled that for a long time. And I think I still fulfill it to this day, although, when I decided to have children, when I decided to get married, when I decided to buy a house, when I started to like do these more adult things, like of course that, there's trade-offs. It's like, okay, I'm giving up a little bit of autonomy, or I'm giving up a lot of autonomy now.
Well, and what's funny is I know that there's going to be a listener or two, or quite a few, that listens to what you just said, and to them it's like their nightmare scenario. So I think of like, my wife is a perfect example of this. Like she's somebody that loves the structure of working for a larger company. Mm-hmm. And like every time I talk to her about any of the risks that we face or the decisions I have to make, she's like, that scares the shit out of me. Yeah. I have zero interest. So I find it so interesting that you have like, there is a division, you have these people that see the autonomy as this like overarching freedom that's going to allow them to pivot and make moves the way they want. And then for other people, they're like, nope, I want structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. when it gets really bad and it feels overwhelming and stressful and, my mind will wander back to like, man, it'd be kind of cool if I could just like punch the clock at the hospital right now, like, or like I look at my brother's a physician and he's a radiologist, and I look at his schedule. I was like, man, that's a pretty nice schedule. And my best friend who I'm going to see this week, Ben, he's like 7 days on, 7 days off. And so like every other week he like has the whole week off and he takes trips with his kids and does cool. I'm like, oh, maybe that sounds, but it's like, the grass is always greener when you hit stressful times, but when you're in good times, I'm like, I don't want to do any of that. I love what I'm doing, I think it's also just getting comfortable with the fact that in business, there's some seasonality, and sometimes it is about that surviving versus thriving. Like one of the things we talked about Alex Hormozi, like one of the things he always says is like, either the business is growing or I am, and I think that's so true when it comes to trying to maintain this role as like a father, a husband, in addition to the business owner and the entrepreneur. I'm just going to take a quick tangent here to say that I appreciate, on the topic of Alex Hormozi, okay, his name's come out of my mouth at least 3 times on this podcast and on a number of other podcasts that I've done recently, both our own, the Functional Bodybuilding, Look Good, Move Well podcast, and some that I've been guests on. And I don't know. I mean, there are other influential coaches and in business and in fitness that I've mentioned as many times, maybe more, but very few. And I just find it like, to me, that is more of a reflection of the impact that I think he is having and will continue to have. And I know that's something that perhaps, he set out as a goal in creating a brand. It's like now he wants to be known as opposed to like kind of anonymous and just behind the scenes. And the fact that like we're just like dropping his name on like like it's just it's fascinating, and it's inspiring to me as a business owner. We talked about building personal brand. He has companies that do incredibly well, but the growth of his own personal brand in the past 2 years has been like totally inspiring. It's like go from pretty much nobody knowing who you are except for like the guy that had muscles and a mustache on the gym launch ad to being like, oh, I know this person knows me. They understand business. They're a philosopher. They're like, everything. And just like at the tip of your tongue, like, if people are, I certainly pay attention to that. And I'm like, that is when I'm wanting to build personal brand for the sake of helping people and also making them aware of what we do as a company, functional bodybuilding. That is like, I want people to be like on a different podcast, randomly like, oh yeah, the functional bodybuilding guy, Marcus, he was saying this, he was saying that, and blah, blah, blah. Like that's goals right there.
For sure. And I think that what Alex was able to do, and you're doing this yourself too, which is he was able to flip the script on always having an ask to always providing value. And I think that is why his name gets uttered so many times, is because he's not constantly asking something of his listeners. He's not constantly bombarding them with advertisements. He's just somebody that genuinely wants to improve the business world, right? And I think we all, as people that are entrepreneurs and people that especially didn't necessarily come from more of a traditional background with business, genuinely appreciate about him because he's just giving the secrets away, and like, I'm sure you have been through a boatload of mentorship. I have as well. And even I've seen an involvement of it over time. In the beginning, when I first got started, we had worked with someone and it was like every post needs a call to action, like everything you do, call to action. And I feel like we have shifted that. And now it's like, give away the secrets, sell the application, right? You're the expert. Let people see that you have something like monstrously value to offer to the world.
Yeah, for real. That is kind of how you talk about my brand. Like when I guess it was probably 2010 where I actually started to post content, consistently. It was actually in the form of a blog. I mean, I was writing a training blog, and which then I started to like link to through Facebook. And then I think I opened up my Instagram account in 2013 or 2013 maybe, my first CrossFit Games, individual games. But the blog was like, it was information. It was also like a record of my own experience, but like I was making it very public. I mean, anybody could see it. It was every set, rep, weight, training session that I did for like 3 years leading up to me qualifying for my first CrossFit Games as an individual athlete, and had everything, like all my nutrition, like everything. Plus, most days of the week, I posted videos of what I was doing, along with a recap of my daily nutrition. And and then these are my general thoughts on what is happening in the training cycle and why I'm doing these things. And there was always just like, here's information for everybody. And I never had a call to action. Matter of fact, I didn't have a call to action until 2016. After I'd finished my CrossFit career, I was just like committed to showing all this information, education, training knowledge. And I met this woman who's now my business partner. Her name's Satya, and she was like, "Look, let me build you an email list, or let me start you an email list, and we'll just start asking people for their emails." And I was like, "Okay, like whatever that's for, you know." And we started to build that. So that was the ask: go and sign up for the email list, which then led to more free content. We were just giving them more education in longer form, because that's what she said we needed to do. And then, then eventually we actually had a product to sell, and that was the first functional bodybuilding program. So that certainly was the path that we that I took and that we took early on. And now it's like, I find the things that I'm most excited about, creating, or the call to action that I'm most excited about is like, give me more ideas about what you want to learn about. Like I've been pushing that super hard on our podcast lately. Like, hey, like this is another episode that is brought to you by random listener who said we want to learn about this. And
the last one was pretty interesting. I think you had a female competitor for Wadapalooza.
Yes.
That was concerned about competing in a bikini and was kind of teetering on this line of not knowing whether to optimize for the aesthetics, because she knew she was going to be in front of a large stage getting lots of photos done, versus optimizing for performance. And it's funny because I feel like any coach out there would be like, are you kidding me? Like, you have to optimize for performance. But I think you handled it really well in talking about weighing the pros and cons depending on which division she's in, and like what she wants for herself 1 year, 3 years, 5 years down the road. So that was a really fascinating podcast.
Well, thanks for saying that. And she wrote a personal message to Satya a couple days ago, after she listened to it, and it was just so fulfilling to just hear how impactful it was for her. And nice. She was just, spoiler, she was just like, it's so clear to me that I care about my clients being able to perform optimally, like whatever that looks like for themselves. I know what my guiding star is. Like, this is my North Star. I'm going to perform the best that I can. It's a great reminder that like the week leading up to the competition is like a deload. And that's when a lot of like water weight just drops because you're just not as stressed and you're, getting a little bit more recovered. And so she's like, it was just like this loop that was like, oh, people ask for content. They have questions. We provide it. They get a ton of value. And then hundreds of other people, maybe thousands if we're lucky, also learn something from that because they have a similar question or curiosity. And so just leaning into those requests from people, it's like, just tell me what you want to hear. Don't go buy anything. You don't need to go sign up for something. Like, if somebody asks for, if there's a call to action today, it's like, just go get on my email list where we're just going to hit you with a bunch of, training articles. Like today I just wrote, it's coming out tomorrow, but I was running every day for my vacation or my, the Thanksgiving vacation we took back east, because it was like a convenient fitness thing. I was like, I just put my shoes on in the morning and get out and go run 5 miles. And like, I'm not a runner. I don't do that. But people were like, oh, you're getting into the hybrid athlete training. Like, you're really into running now. And I'm like, no, I'm not. But here's what I've learned. So like tomorrow, it's like, here are all the things I learned in a week of running 5 miles a day. Here's how I've trained runners in the past. This is how I approach strength training for, running and distance running. This is how you might want to think about it too. If you're interested in getting into it, avoid these mistakes, and then done.
It is always super convenient when you travel. When I travel to my in-laws, I don't want to have to drag a bunch of equipment with me. So like I can always bring my running shoes, and they live on a giant hill. So I know hill sprints are always a possibility.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Convenience matters when you're on the move.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So speaking of which, one of the things I'm always fascinating with, and this is a very selfish and personal question because of the fact that like I'm a soon to be father in March. And, I'm always interested in watching people curate their life as a father, but also as somebody that is so heavily invested in their business and their own personal fitness. How has being, a father changed your perspective, not only on your own fitness, but also on the way that you write your programming for functional bodybuilding?
Yeah. I mean, we definitely message a lot about like real life fitness application. And not just like real life, like how you're going to use your fitness in your life, but like, does your fitness fit your lifestyle? And if your lifestyle is like mine, which is like either a busy entrepreneur or you have a demanding, fulfilling and demanding job, if you have a family, if you have kids, any of those things, like what place does fitness have? 25-year-old Marcus, 28-year-old Marcus, who was competing for the CrossFit Games, had a business, but it was not as demanding as my business is today. By the simple fact that I couldn't grow the business as much when I was dedicating so much time to fitness. I didn't have kids. I was living the single life basically. I mean, my wife and I and girlfriend at the time, like we were together, but we were not like, we were living kind of the single lifestyle in a way.
Right.
And so we do message a lot about it. I think about it a lot now, of course. I'm like, is this, I have to satisfy my own needs and I have to solve my own problems in the best way that I know how, and then share that recipe with people in hopes that it will help them. And if that recipe can help them, then they'll, like you said, they'll want to, sign up for the program or, pay us or, give us their time and attention, right? Any of those three trade-offs. And it's, as the chips stack in your life, commitment wise, stress wise, obligation, what's the third, like another way of saying it would be like things that you're passionate about. Like it's not, I mentioned like stress and obligation, but like passions, like love my family, want to spend time with them, love my business, want to spend time on it. It's hard. It demands a lot of my attention. Like the kids do too. Like it's not all rainbows and sunshine. It's definitely not, so we have a finite amount of resources, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. It's not endless. Everything that we love and we put energy towards, or even things that we hate that take and consume our energy, depletes that energy resource pool that we have, And if you've got 100 is the maximum of amount of resources, and you got, 25 going to family, 25 going to business, 25 going to fitness, and 25 going to like environmental stress, then anytime you want to like turn one up, one of them has to get turned down. If you're eating like crap, if you're sleeping like crap, if you're, putting toxic chemicals on your body every day, guess what? Your environmental stress is cranked all the way up. And so guess what? Your fitness is going to go down. Your family, connections are going to go down. Your business is going to get turned down. So this is an argument to be really diligent about your nutrition, your sleep, like optimize your environment so you can turn that environmental stress as low as possible so that the other three can thrive.
Sure.
Now,
yeah. And I think it's, you highlighted the importance of having tools and tactics necessary to minimize distraction and to try to optimize for the life that you want. And then there's this kind of like layer over top of it, which is also just being okay with having flexibility. It's like not having to have such a strict, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, and this is how I do this, and this is how I do that to everything in your life. And I think this is something that as a business owner, you inevitably have to find, right? You got to get to a place where you are comfortable with things not going perfectly all the time.
That's best case scenario. Because I don't know that I'm certainly not there, and nor do I think that's for me personally, and maybe for others listening, like, while that might be true, well, that is true. Things are not going to go perfectly all the time. Doing the psychological work, the mental work, the personal work to get to a place where you're okay with that. That's a lifetime of work for me. Like, I won't be okay with it. Like, I'm holding on to the things that I can control. And that's how I look at aspects of life that I can control. Yeah. I can't control business, but I can do my best. And I'm much better at controlling my physical environment and my fitness. So fitness, nutrition, physical environment, that's the best stuff that I can control. I can't control aspects of my, kids' life, their sleep schedules, their, needs. Like, so what can I actually control the variables on the best and make those the areas that I put, you got to lean into those areas so that the uncontrollable stuff has less total impact on me and as an entrepreneur, as a father, and that's to say, like, I've had to learn how to not obsess over the things that I can control getting out of hand, like if I lose sleep one night, or if like my daughters, wake us up 3 times in a single night, or if we're traveling and I can't prepare my perfect meals, but I've worked so hard and I've tried to solve those problems so much that, like, I don't miss workouts when I'm on the road. I don't miss workouts. I don't miss protein every single day. You'll never see me being like at a gas station struggling and grabbing Funyuns. Like, I won't do it. It's just, I know how to navigate that part of my life, which gives me a certain base of resilience against the other many, many uncontrollables of life, which go up exponentially as a business owner and as a parent. Sure. So that's where, I guess maybe that's the thesis statement here, is like, yes, these things, these uncontrollables are going to go up so much as a parent and as a business owner. If that's the route you're going to go in life, then you need to double down on these other areas, not in a neurotic way, not in a, like, if I miss protein at a meal, I'm going to be crushed as a person and I'm going to think I'm terrible, but own that those are the areas that you have a little bit more ability to control, or at least influence. You have more influence over those areas. And that is like what motivates you, Mark? It's like, well, what motivates me to stay on track with these things is that I got all these other things in my life that I know I can't control, are going to be highly volatile. And, so that's why I lean into this. It's like, without it, I'm going to feel worse.
Right. Now, how often do you make shifts to your personal programming based on some of those uncontrollables, like the kids being up all night. So for instance, like how often do you say push through it anyway versus take a lighter day today?
Rarely. I mean, but let me explain that. Like, it's Tuesday, it's workout day, right? So it's happening. What I might do, when the workout comes, how I might adapt the training session, I'll adapt things often. I'll get to the gym or the plan was to get to the gym and do, heavy back squats, but just last night didn't go well. So we're going to call an audible and change that up. But I don't. And so, yeah, it might be easier, or it just might be a different focus, something that I can get my energy around. But I also, I'm fortunately at a stage now with the kids that they're like in slightly more predictable patterns, like between like infancy and 2 years old, or even like before they were potty trained, like, it's really, really unpredictable at a lot of phases, especially like getting sleep schedules in place and stuff like that. So, we're certainly not out of the woods by any means.
Yeah,
but,
I'm like mentally preparing myself.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot more sort of day to day, like how am I doing? How am I feeling? But the scheduling of life, I think, if you're going to schedule a workout, like you're going to have childcare set up at that time. So it's like, someone's going to be watching your kid. You have this hour window to work out. Yeah, if you're not feeling great that day because you were pulling an all-nighter with the kid who was like throwing up or, was having a hard time sleeping, then you still have that hour. Go for a walk, or,
right.
Put on your shoes and go for a light jog, or instead of doing back squats, like, do a 60-minute easy flow with like a goblet squat in there and some running and some jump roping and some step ups and some push ups. Like, don't neglect yourself for that hour, and don't miss that opportunity that you already made room for in your schedule.
Right. So basically just find a way to utilize that. You might change the intensity or the exact application of what you're doing, but make that time for you.
Precisely. Yeah. Which I think was your original question. And so in that way, like definitely you're going to want to lean into that. I think what I originally was thinking was like, yeah, no, that's the movement session is non-negotiable. Like it's going to happen no matter what. And we'll auto-regulate the intensity a little bit, the intent of the day to match how you're feeling physically, because the last thing you want to do is, I didn't sleep all last night, but I got to hit my 5x5 numbers today, and they're super grindy, and you go in and you tweak something, you hurt yourself, right?
Yeah.
That's not good for anybody. And I've made that mistake a number of times, in not unintentionally, of course, but hit some injuries with young kids, and that's not fun. Like you don't want to have a tweaked out neck or shoulder and have to like carry a baby around.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Now, functional bodybuilding has really taken off over the last couple of years, and you guys have seen some amazing growth. Like, what do you think it is about functional bodybuilding that just appeals so well to people? Kind of like you spread out in terms of the types of people that are interested in it. I feel like you get some of the people that were interested more on the bodybuilding side and are now looking to go the functional route, and people that are in the CrossFit side looking to kind of focus more on some of the aesthetic, but also some of these secondary movers and isolation movements.
Yeah, I think you definitely, you kind of just spoke to sort of the broader appeal across the aisle, so to speak. You've got your bodybuilders on one side, you got your CrossFitters or functional athletes on the other side. I think that the bodybuilding community that is functional bodybuilding appeals to is not like your hardcore bodybuilders who really follow the sport of bodybuilding and who want to, go through massing and cutting cycles and build and right. It's more of like I'll just call it general pop, gen pop. Somebody's like, I want to get in shape. And what they see on their feed is bodybuilders doing bodybuilding stuff. It was like me when I was a teenager and I had Flex magazine and I was like, oh, I'm going to go and do the bodybuilding workouts. Not because I really wanted to do like bodybuilding stage shows or I really wanted to ever I didn't desire to get that big or I didn't ever think I could get that big. But I just wanted to be in shape. I wanted to have muscles. I wanted to feel strong. I loved the way it was. And after some time I was like, oh man, this is like kind of, it's kind of repetitive. And, when I really do a lot of it, like I kind of feel like I'm an athlete and I feel like I'm getting stiff in some areas and there's some drawbacks. So then like functional training kind of shows up in my periphery and I'm like, ooh, what's that over there? That's kind of interesting to me. So that's the person I think that sees functional bodybuilding and they're like, oh, cool. Like here's this guy who like is pretty jacked. So he's clearly like done some bodybuilding. He's got a good physique and he's like moving and doing all these other things. He's like doing Cossack squats and, he's, can do some cool stuff on the pull-up bar and, got a little cardio going. Looks like we can mix those things together. Oh, let me try that. Right. And then on the other side, the functional athlete who kind of went the CrossFit route or even the competitive CrossFit route and who's been sort of pushing their body super hard, right? Because if you get into that and you fall in love with the process of CrossFit, like I don't want to say it's inevitable, but it's almost inevitable that you're going to like want to push harder and chase PRs and chase, your fastest time. And that process of constantly chasing something a bit more is hard on anybody. It's hard in any sport. It's hard on the body. And so when we message about doing functional bodybuilding where it's like, oh, I can train and not have to be going against a clock. Oh, I can train and not have to go for a repetition maximum. I can do all of this stuff, but I don't have to actually max out my intensity every single day. Oh, that's appealing. Let me try that. That seems like it would be right up my alley. And within a couple weeks, people like feel better. They're like, oh, my joints hurt less. And that's a pretty powerful stick factor.
Yeah. So it's kind of like aesthetics meets sustainability.
Yeah. Yeah. With like, the ability to push intensity, as your life can really allow for it. Right. That's sort of the message is like, is doing CrossFit as a sport bad? No, it's not. But if you can't dedicate the time to recover from it and really, let your body heal adequately from each session, then eventually you're going to break. It's just that's just how it goes. And do most people have the time and the energy and the resources to do it the right way? No, they don't. Because, like any professional sport, like I don't have the time to be an NBA player, nor the skill or the genetics or but I couldn't just show up even if somebody offered me a spot in the Lakers and like suddenly put in the amount of energy and time to like do well in the sport because I'm doing all this other stuff. Sure. And that's the same goes for CrossFit as a sport.
Well, one of the things I love about you and what you've done over the years is that I feel like a lot of people that left the CrossFit scene that were in it to varying degrees, whether they were a coach or a gym owner or an athlete or some combination thereof, they kind of drew a line in the sand and they said, well, this is my new thing. It has nothing to do with CrossFit. And like, what's been so great about you is you've carried some of those roots with you in that you still do chest to bar pull-ups, toes to bar, and some of these more, coined CrossFit type movements. And I think what that has done is it's just allowed you to have so much more novelty and what I would guess would be fun as part of your workouts.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, those movements really are, they definitely were born out of the CrossFit, sport. And I mean, certainly to a certain degree, the methodology, but the sport and pushing for speed, power, force production, that's what led to a lot of those, gymnastics movements like evolving in the way that they have. Right. Now, I love them because I put the time in to learn the skill of it. It's like, you ask somebody like, "Hey, do you love jump roping?" They're like, "No, I can't even skip rope. It's not a fun thing for me to do. It's hard." But then you look at somebody who's like a jump rope, master, and they're like these TikTokers that like just do these crazy things. I'm like, "Hey, is jump roping fun?" They're like, "Yeah, it's so much fun." It's like, it's because you know how to do it, right? So right. Somebody's like, "Hey, I love this training program. It's just these chest bars suck. Like, I don't like them." It's like, oh, because we don't know how to do them yet. So I definitely preach, like, there's certain movements that we do in functional fitness that are skills that you have to learn. And once you learn them, then you can use them as just any other tool in the gym. It's like bicep curls with an easy bar is a low level skill. Like, you just, you got to learn how to contract the muscle, and that's it. A chest to bar pull up, for sets of 15, that's a high level skill. Sure. You got to learn that. And then once you learn it, and then you learn how to do it under aerobic fatigue, like, then it's just like jogging on the treadmill. It's just another thing, it's just, you get a different stimulus from it, and it adds, like you said, some novelty and some fun. So we have options for people who want to keep those movements in their training. We also have options for people that don't ever want to do that. Like, I've got an entire training track that will never see a chest to bar pull-up in it. I have a training track that will never see the Olympic lifts in it. And I've got a training track that has burpee muscle-ups in it. So it all can exist in the functional bodybuilding method, because what we're doing is we're trying to, like you said, we're bridging this gap between functional training and bodybuilding, and we're dosing it in a way that's going to allow people to do it for a long time.
Yeah. Now, I have to bring this up because we talked about the authenticity pace, and that's something that I genuinely love about you and your content, and you've stuck true to that over the years. What do you make of this whole situation that's going on with the Liver King?
Oh, wow. This is the first time I've been asked in a public forum about it.
I had to, because like it's so like current, and it's also interesting because like you, and we didn't dive deep into your diet. I actually was going to ask you about your fasting protocols and that sort of thing, but you've always been somebody that's been more on the holistic side with everything. Mm-hmm. And I think he kind of like embodied that from like a WWE wrestler perspective. Mm-hmm. And yet like here we are, there was clearly this like complete lack of transparency and authenticity on his side. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on all that?
I have many thoughts that would take us a whole podcast to unravel. And I'll say that I have a lot of thoughts that go beyond just like the news break, because more like sort of privately, not for any other reason than just not my entire life, and everything that I do is not public knowledge. Like I have things that I just do privately that don't need to be shared on social media. Privately, I actually had a relationship with Brian Johnson. Like I communicated with him a decent amount over the past year and a half that he's sort of been on the social media scene. I got to meet him in person, his family, his wife, his kids, spend time with them. And so I have a different perspective than most people. And I'm certainly not going to like stand here and defend him or say anything about like the current media cycle that's going on, other than, these things have to, I always think having the truth, come out and it's good for everybody involved. It's good for the consumer of his content. because with full transparency, you can make more informed decisions about how you're going to consume the content, what you want to connect to, what you don't want to connect to. It's going to be good for him. It's going to be good for his family. It's going to be good for their honesty, authenticity, transparency with each other. And it'll ultimately be good for his business, not from like, it'll help him sell more, but it'll just be like, hey, this is your, you want to be aligned to something that is truthful, authentic, like then get truthful and authentic, and what his business is and what he stands for from an ancestral standpoint. There's still a lot of merit and a lot of good that is coming from that. And the principles, the lifestyle movement principles that he has been preaching for the last year, with his, personal use of PEDs and aside, like they do help people. Like it is
right.
These are lifestyle, nutrition, movement principles that help. I mean, I'm not saying like follow the Liver King diet. I'm saying like eat whole foods, eat real food, like stop eating processed stuff. Like that's a message that's real, and get outside, connect with nature, get some sun. Like that's real. That's impactful. Lift heavy stuff, move, like work out. That's impactful. And you can't do those things and look like Brian Johnson. Like, right. And many of us, a lot of us knew that. Most people knew that. And in some instances, people like still got inspired to try and be more than they could be by seeing somebody preach that, which I think is powerful too. And sure. I don't believe, again, it's like no part of me is condoning like, deceit and lying. But there's plenty of PED users, abusers, TRT people that are using exogenous hormones that are out there in the fitness space who are honest about it. And still the audience looks at it and sees a supra physiological human performing something, and they get inspired and they take their information and they use it to better themselves. And to the people who are like, hey, I'm honest about my PED use. Okay, great. In every single post that you've ever put out? No. And there's a lot of people who are just grabbing little bits here and there too. And so they might only see the post where you didn't talk about your PED use, but they see that you're jacked, and then they see you doing this thing and they're like, oh, I got to do that to get jacked. Like the whole world of like fitness influencers and people using drugs and being out, or like using drugs or using hormone replacement or being prescribed things, like, I think it's hard because there's a lot of uneducated consumers that might make a mistake and be misled, but there's also a lot of people that are sharing good information that I would hate to see, a scandal as big as this make them distrustful of like getting out and like doing something good for themselves. You're
right. I think we have to be really careful not to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater with this one, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of really good things that have come out of his popularity and rising in content. And I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to the honesty piece, even though you also highlighted that it's not necessarily a part of everybody's post that is honest about being on things. One of the things that's always been fascinating to me is like CrossFit is probably one of, if not the, biggest communities that is just so much in disapproval of steroid use, and for good reason, both for the health perspective and the fact that it is a tested sport. But yet they also are in admiration of people like Louis Simmons and Mark Bell, who have been their entire lives pretty open about their use of performance enhancing drugs. So I feel like in this case, it was very much so the lack of truth and honesty that really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And like, look, we also have to admit people love scandal. Like there's also just the scandal element to this where people love, what's new and buzz and what's making noise.
Yeah. Yeah. And, look, I also wouldn't want to say that, like, despite having had, personal connections and a relationship with him over the year, just like, I'm not one of his 5 closest people. Trust me. I might not even be in the top 100. I might be way down the list, but and that was not to say like, it doesn't sting for me. Like I'm like, oh, like I kind of feel like I've been lied to, I mean, like not kind of, like I feel like I have been. And I even as like an educated fitness, consumer and professional, like sort of like was overlooking part of the story and maybe extrapolating too much out of like his message, perhaps. Like, I don't know. Like, so, if I can be misled to a certain degree, I know a lot of other people can, but why can somebody like me be misled? Like, because I truly am, I'm very trustful of people generally. And I'm also like, I want to believe that we all have more to give. I want to believe that I have more to give than what I bring every single day. Like, I loved the years that I trained in CrossFit where I was motivated by so many athletes that were better than me. And I never once was like, well, that guy's on steroids, so I'm not going to try and be as good as him. And even when I found out years later, like so-and-so was like doing steroids, and I was like, oh, like, dude, no wonder I couldn't lift as much as him. I'm like, but I wasn't pissed about it. I was glad that I had somebody to chase, and I'm glad I had somebody to push that pushed me to be better and to, never limit what I could do psychologically.
Do you think if you had Marcus of today as your coach back then that you could have done better? I think if I had Marcus as a mentor, sure. I don't think I had the best coaches at the time that I could have. My coaches were great. But having somebody who had lived my experience and knew me as deeply as I would know myself certainly could provide, I could have a weekly sit down with my 26-year-old self and be like, hey, let's talk about some things. And I'm going to help you get through some stuff a little faster. For sure. Yeah, I love it. Well, Marcus, this has been a ton of fun, man. I would love to have you on again. There's a million other directions I wanted to go with this. I'm fascinated by your morning fast or eating mostly in the morning and fasting at night, because I'm the opposite of that. So much we could dive into. But, dude, seriously, it has been nothing but a pleasure having you on. And I really do appreciate you getting on the podcast.
Well, it's been great. And this when I talk about this later and people ask me how to go, I'll say this probably of all the podcasts I've ever been on has gone in so many different good directions. We covered a lot today, so I appreciate just being able to flow in a lot of different directions. And yeah, after you have your kid and you've been in the parenting world for a little bit, let's reconnect. I'm sure we'll have a whole new set of things to talk about.
Absolutely, no doubt. Well, give the listeners an idea of like where they can learn more about you.
Yeah, on the topic of all that, the free education content that we're putting out, or just try to teach people as much as we can and make their health and fitness journey easier, more effective, getting them to their goals. It all happens through our different media channels. So the first is the email list. You can sign up for that at functional-bodybuilding.com. And then if you want to get long form education stuff, head us up on YouTube. I think that's a great place. Marcus Philly on YouTube, putting out some pretty frequent long form content there. So those would just be great places to check us out.
I love it. Well, hey, thank you for all that you do. And again, thanks for jumping on.
Appreciate it, Derek.